Good evening. You're watching AWANI Tonight with me, Saraya Mia. Transport Minister Anthony Loke announced plans to open more contraflow roads in Kuala Lumpur to ease traffic congestion. 3 new contraflow roads will be opened from July 3rd, beginning with the Sungai Besi toll to the Sungai Besi Expressway junction.
Loke said the contraflow will also be extended from Jalan Maharaja Lela to Taman Konot. However, this lane will only be accessible to private vehicles, excluding motorcycles. Additionally, there will be another contraflow from Ampang Point to Jalan Tun Razak, but only for public transport. According to Loke, around 2 million vehicles enter Kuala Lumpur every morning, while a total of 6 million cars were recorded in the city within a 24-hour period. He further urged Kuala Lumpur City Hall to adopt stricter measures when granting permit extensions to construction companies that request road closures for their projects.
The Ministry of Transport MOT is in the process of taking immediate action on the MACC report on misconduct involving the staff of an agency under the ministry. Minister Anthony Loke said that MACC Chief Commissioner Tan Sri Azam Baki met him to discuss disciplinary cases which have not been resolved.
As a result of the meeting, he instructed his Ministry's Secretary-General, Datuk Jana Santiran Munyayan, to ensure that every disciplinary case is acted upon immediately and to report back to MACC. When asked about the number of pending disciplinary cases, Loke said that it was an internal matter and that there were also cases which had been resolved but had not been reported to the MACC. He said this at a press conference after chairing the Technical Committee on Traffic Congestion meeting here today. It was reported earlier that Azam had disclosed that some government agencies ignored more than 500 reports of misconduct involving their staff, even though MACC had recommended action to be taken, including the Road Transport Department (JPJ) and the police.
The government will adopt household net disposable income metrics to ensure better delivery of its socio-economic policies. Economy Minister Rafizi Ramli said the change will be made in phases and will involve his ministry, among other government agencies.
Sebelum ini, setiap kali kita berbincang mengenai bantuan mengenai klasifikasi ekonomi, kita tertumpu kepada klasifikasi B40, M40 dan T20. Sebelum ini memang ada banyak perbincangan mengenai pendekatan ini kerana dia tidak menggambarkan sepenuhnya dari segi perbandingan kemampuan dari satu isi rumah ke satu isi rumah, kerana ada banyak variabel lain selain daripada pendapatan semata-mata. Variabel itu termasuklah berapa tanggungan anak, lokasi dan sebagainya.
The transition to the new approach, he said, will be strengthened with the introduction of Malaysia's main database called PADU, which will focus on collecting data of net disposable income per household. Rafizi added that the government plans for PADU and the new approach to be live by January.
The Communications and Digital Ministry will call up the organizer of British band Coldplay's concert in order to understand the ticketing issue. Minister Fahmi Fazil said this was after there were many complaints by people who struggled to buy tickets.
Kita akan menjemput, memanggil penganjur konsert tersebut bersama-sama dengan pihak KPDN serta MCMC untuk kita memahami apa yang sebenarnya berlaku, kenapa ia berlaku, bagaimana ia boleh diatasi sekarang, serta apa langkah-langkah yang mungkin perlu kita teliti supaya ia tidak berulang di masa depan. Antara perkara yang mungkin kita akan teliti ialah cara tiket itu dibeli, sama ada perlu ada sekatan ataupun syarat-syarat yang dicadangkan ataupun dikenakan terhadap penganjur-penganjur ataupun melihat kepada kesesuaian keadaan.
Coldplay is set to perform on November 22nd at the Bukit Jalil National Stadium, marking the band's first ever concert in Malaysia.
In other news, the region of Pahang calls for women to be included in decision-making processes related to climate adaptation and mitigation, as they are disproportionately impacted by climate change. Tengku Hassanal Ibrahim Alam Shah Al Sultan Abdullah said this is important so that women's voices are included in all stages of decision-making.
Women are disproportionately impacted by climate change, but are not always included in decision-making processes related to climate adaptation and mitigation. It is important to ensure that women's voices are heard and that they are involved in all stages of decision-making, from planning to implementation and execution. It's important to ensure that women have access to healthcare, including reproductive healthcare, and that their health needs are taken into account in climate change adaptation and mitigation efforts.
He was speaking at the Associated Country Women of the World ACWW Triennial World Conference on Friday.
More. Egypt. England.
We'll go for a quick break. Stay tuned.
Engkau adalah yang terunggul. Apabila kau hidup untuk detik gemilang ni, kau sedia untuk menggalah segala bebanan dan bertekad untuk menjadi harapan untuk semua.
Welcome back. The government has begun discussions with various stakeholders on the implementation of a progressive wage system in Malaysia. We look to our neighbor country, Singapore, for a semblance of their model. Professor Terence Ho from the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy offers an overview of how the system is implemented.
So Singapore's progressive wage model is our alternative to a minimum wage. It prescribes a set of wage floors and ladders for sectors that hire low-wage workers, for example, the cleaning, security, and landscaping sectors. And these wage ladders correspond to different levels of skill and job responsibility, and hence they allow for wages to grow in tandem with skills and productivity. The wage floors and ladders are negotiated among unions and employers, could be represented by industry associations, and with the support of relevant public agencies. They are then made mandatory through licensing requirements for all employers in the sector so as to level the playing field. And so the initial implementation of mandatory progressive wages in security, cleaning, and landscaping sectors benefited over 70,000 local workers. And what's noteworthy is that the median real wages of the local workers in these sectors rose by more than the median for all sectors between 2014 and 2019. So for these sectors, they rose by a cumulative 30%, compared with 21% at the median for all sectors. And since then, in Singapore, the progressive wage model has been extended to more sectors, such as food services, retail, and waste management, as well as occupations such as clerical assistants and drivers.
Sustainability is key to a successful implementation of any policy. Professor Terence Ho discusses key factors for the progressive wage model to flourish based on Singapore's experience.
First, it's the strong trust among the stakeholders. So in Singapore's context, we call them the tripartite partners, the employers, the union, the government, that help to facilitate the negotiation and consensus on the wage floors, ladders, as well as the skills that the workers need. Second, I would say that the progressive wages will need to be continually updated as the general wage level and the cost of living rise. over the years. So having a forward schedule of wage increases that are planned for a number of years gives employers greater certainty, and they can factor in these wage costs when they are putting in their tender bids. And finally, I think it's recognized that productivity gains may not always be able to offset higher wage costs. So the additional costs have to be borne by companies or passed on to consumers. In Singapore, the government has provided transitional support to partly offset the higher wage costs. But it's something that, society as a whole has to be prepared to bear this additional cost.
Terence also suggested other inclusive measures to ensure fair wages for all workers.
This has to be paired with good labour market regulation and monitoring to ensure that we do not have cases where workers are forced out of formal employment into informal work because firms want to save on, the wages that they pay, or where firms simply bring in foreign workers to substitute for local workers who are on the scheme. So measures should also be taken to protect the interests of freelancers and gig workers who may not be direct beneficiaries of progressive wages.
On to international news. A 95-year-old grandmother tasered by Australian police at an old folks' home is now in critical condition. Police said on Friday that a homicide squad has joined a high-profile investigation into the incident. New South Wales Assistant Police Commissioner Peter Cotter said the woman had a knife in her hands but could barely walk.
At the time she was tasered, she was approaching police, but it is fair to say at a slow pace. She had a walking frame, but she had a knife.
He said police were called to the old folks' home in Cooma, 300 kilometres from Sydney on Wednesday, after staff found resident Claire Nowlin outside her room holding a steak knife. Cotter added that two officers spoke with Nowlin for several minutes, but when she failed to drop the knife and approach them, one fired a taser, knocking her to the ground. She suffers from dementia and wandered the facility for several hours before taking the knife from the kitchen. Nowlin was taken to hospital, where she is in critical condition, fading in and out of consciousness. The officer is being investigated under Level 1 Critical Incident Investigation, a category police reserve for exceptional cases where injuries lead to death or imminent death. The homicide squad is involved. Meanwhile, physical classes for more than 100,000 students in Mexico City was cancelled due to falling ash from one of the country's most active volcanoes. A total of 154 exhalations of mostly ash and gas have been recorded from the volcano over the past 24 hours and is being closely monitored by scientists.
Classes in the affected towns will be temporarily conducted online as volcanic activity persists. Popocatépetl, which means Smoky Mountain, is located 72 kilometers southeast of Mexico City, home to about 22 million people, including the metropolitan area. It has been persistently emitting toxic fumes, ash and rock fragments for the past 30 years after it was awakened from a long slumber in 1994. Authorities have maintained the alert level for the volcano at yellow, indicating a moderate risk.
Over in Japan, dozens marched through Hiroshima in protest of the Group of 7 G7 Leaders Summit being held in the city. They slammed the group made of several developed countries for interfering in other countries' internal affairs and for constantly creating regional tensions. Protests has been ongoing throughout the week, leading up to the first day of the summit today. The protesters include university students and family members of atomic bombing victims. Leaders of the G7 are meeting in the southern Japanese city of Hiroshima for their annual summit from May 19 to 21st. They have so far agreed on new sanctions and export controls targeting Russia over its war against Ukraine, just days before Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky is expected to join them in person. On It's About Youth tonight, we'll be discussing how Malaysia can further sharpen their digital skills to meet their growing market demands. Tune in at 10:30 p.m. And that's all we have for you on AWANI tonight. Thank you for watching. I'm Saraya Mia, and we'll see you next week.